The chandelier threw tiny constellations across the marble. The laughter at table 7 felt like a storm at my back, and the red wine sliding down my thrift store blue dress was hot as a slap. I told myself not to cry, not here, not in front of Mr. Peterson and his chorus of executives who loved a public takedown more than dessert. And then a calm voice cut through all of it like a clean line in wet paint. He said, "She's with me," and the whole room held its breath. I remember the glass of ice water setting down in front of me as if it had weight beyond the glass. I remember the emerald suit that should have been loud but wasn't. And I remember Nathan Cross looking straight at the man who'd bumped me and laughed and told me to put the cleaning bill on my paycheck. "You've said enough for one evening," he said. Not mean, not dramatic, just final. And suddenly, the thing that had felt like a collapse turned into a doorway. You know what I mean? When someone gives you a way out, and you finally take one step. Outside, the night air cooled the shame on my skin. I kept saying you didn't have to do that, and he kept answering. I did, because what happened in there was wrong, because power isn't supposed to bruise people and call it leadership, because dignity is worth interrupting dinner for. And then his driver pulled up, leather seats, tissues passed. Without me asking, small mercies that feel big when your hands are still shaking. And he said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Simone Johnson," trying to sound like someone whose voice didn't wobble, trying to sound like I was more than a stained dress and a dead end. On the ride through a city that looked richer than I felt, he asked what I wanted, not what I did not, where I ranked, and the truth jumped out before I had time to make it pretty. I said I wanted to build something that lasts to help small businesses that are always one broken fridge from closing, to be the person I wished my mom had had when she worked 2 jobs and stretched rent like taffy. He didn't laugh. He said, "That's specific, that's good." Then he handed me a card that felt heavier than paper and said, "Call me tomorrow, let's talk about your future." The next morning, the voicemail from Peterson and Associates landed like a door slamming. Services no longer required. No reference, no severance. Yeah, that happened. And right behind that, I dialed the number Nathan had given me. The assistant put me through, like he'd told her to expect me, and an hour later we were sitting in a quiet corner of a coffee shop that smelled like cinnamon and choices. And when I said, "I'm not looking for charity," he shook his head and told me my professors said I didn't just pass, I lifted that. I graduated with honors while working. That he doesn't make business decisions based on impulse, but he trusts his instincts about people, and his instinct said, I could be the person he needed, a personal assistant with actual judgment, discretion, and spine. He laid out the work, the access, the salary, the growth, the rules, and he asked me to say yes, so I did, with a steady breath and a heart that felt like it finally had a map. Cross Industries gleamed like ambition, 43 stories of glass and sun, marble floors. Art that looked expensive on purpose, but the detail that got me was the children's drawings on Nathan's wall, the way his late wife's absence turned into the presence of a little girl named Emma, who was 8. And clearly the center of the universe family, first, he said, not a slogan, an override. And if you've ever tried to hold 2 worlds at once, boardrooms and school plays, you know how much that one sentence matters. You know what I mean. I learned fast 15-minute buffers so he could think before meetings travel through a security-minded agency who gets through on the first ring and who never does. I found the rhythm I liked, the weight, and then life tested. The new pattern childcare fell through. The school nurse, called Emma, had a fever, and Nathan's day was locked. I'm sorry to ask this, he said, because good men apologize when they have to reroute your day, and I told him to add my name to the list, and I went, and that's how I met the kid who would crack my heart. Wide open, a brave little person sitting on a cot, asking if I was Daddy's helper or Daddy's boss, and I said some days one, some days the other, Today, I'm your ride. We drove home to a house that looked rich and felt warm. I made peanut butter and apple slices. She told me about school and friends, and the neighbor who brought cookies because Daddy forgets to eat when he thinks too much. And when Nathan walked in, loose eyes, tired, the relief on his face went straight through me. "Thank you," he said, and I knew he meant more than an errand. The days built something, little bricks of trust and competence. My morning briefings got sharper. His questions got deeper. He asked what I thought, not just what I scheduled. I watched the way he treated everyone with respect, from the security desk to the CFO, and when a board meeting threatened to crush a father-daughter dance, I made a flurry of calls and moved the meeting to lunch, and suddenly the impossible was solved. Because people will move mountains when you tell them the truth about what you're protecting. Family first isn't just a t-shirt, it's a calendar setting. Somewhere in that stretch of time, feelings started simmering. Not because he's a billionaire, that's the least interesting thing about him, but because his laugh hits air like a window opening on a hot day, because he asks about my mom, like he's taking care of her too, because our hands reached for the same file, and a tiny spark felt like a full sentence. And then came the charity gala chandeliers, live music, the ocean of formal wear, and he asked me to come as his guest, not his assistant. "That sends a message," I said. "I know," he said, "I'm ready to send it." We danced, the room got soft around the edges, and on a terrace under string lights, he told me he'd been in love with me for weeks. The words were quiet and certain, like a door closing behind the wind. And I told him I loved him too, yes I did, and we kissed like we meant every word, because we did. And then you pay the price you always pay when a private feeling goes public. Whispers at the office, glances that measure and weigh, a mentor taking me aside to say you're capable. But this road is littered with people who thought love would protect them from optics. The CFO talking to Nathan about risk and policy, and headlines, a gossip site guessing at my motives with a photo they didn't ask to use. The hardest part was a call from his late wife's parents, worried that Emma would build a bond with someone who might not stay. I understood their fear, even as it stung, so we did what we thought grown-ups do. We made space, we built boundaries. We tried to let time tell us who we were. And the truth is, space sounds wise until you're living it. Then it just feels like air that's too thin. Work lost its color. Emma asked if I was still coming for tacos, and when I said grown-ups were figuring things out, she looked at me and said, "When grown-ups say complicated, they mean scared." And I felt seen by an 8-year-old in a way I hadn't let myself be seen by anyone. The turn came the night he asked me to meet him at the very restaurant where it started. I could feel the room watching as we sat, not tense, just curious, hungry for a scene, and Nathan stood, not on a chair, not with a toast raised high, just with his voice steady. 6 months ago, in this room, I watched a woman keep her dignity. When people tried to take it from her, I learned that real power is quiet and kind, and it steps in. He turned to me, and the world dropped away. He went down on one knee, pulled out a small box, and said, "Simone, be my partner in life." Emma's person, the music in a house that's been too quiet. All the arguments about timing and optics and what people would say lined up like dominoes, and then something bigger stepped in, the truth we'd been protecting. Under all that fear, I said yes. I said it with my whole chest. The room clapped. A few people cried, the same city that had watched me be humiliated, watched me choose a future I wanted. And sometimes that matters more than we like to admit. We told Emma that night on the couch, blanket, capes, sticky fingers, pure joy. She asked if she could be the flower captain, which is apparently a promotion, and months later we danced under lights at our wedding and whispered no regrets, because there weren't any, not about the hard parts either, because the hard parts taught us how to build guardrails that were real. HR policies tightened. I moved my reporting line outside Nathan's chain. Succession plans got inked. We made our love true at home and unimpeachable at work, and I launched the small business program I had dreamed about. One grant, one mentorship, one clean P&L at a time, because winning in public means very little if you don't lift someone else with your win. I know what some people still think, that a girl in a thrift store dress grabbed a golden ladder, that love is a strategy if the zip code is right, that money buys a happier ending. But here's what I learned. Money buys nicer chairs, kindness buys courage, and courage is the only thing that makes a room full of laughter. Fall silent when someone finally says enough, so tell me what you think was saying is a mistake in a world that will always read motives into a woman's choice? Or is it a bigger mistake to act like love needs a permission slip from people who weren't there when the wine hit, and the laughter rose, and a stranger put down a glass of water, like a promise? Drop your take in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me the moment someone stepped in for you, or when you stepped in for someone else. And if you believe quiet power changes rooms, hit subscribe and share this with one person who needs to hear it today.